All right, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy. So yeah, like Jeremy said, we're going to talk about Amazon Code Whisperer. This is a fairly new service, very cutting edge generative AI coding companion. Like Jeremy said, it's it threatens to become the AI coder, so that the human is not even needed. I don't really think that's going to be the case for a long time, as you'll see. Um, Although Code Whisperer is really cool and advanced and kind of does some pretty amazing things, no threat of getting rid of the programmer in the near term. So you'll see that as we go forward. I'm going to give you just a really quick slide overview of what it is and kind of the problems it's trying to solve, and then I'm going to jump in, and I don't have a really organized a demo for you. I'm just going to walk through the kind of things that I like to play around with in Code Whisperer and see how those kind of come out in in a few different IDEs. So just kind of play around with it in front of you and kind of see what you think, and and just kind of get ideas even for what other people think they could actually use this for. So um, so we're going to talk about sort of where this concept has come from. What are the drivers of coming up with something like this? Some use cases. I'm I'm showing customers on here, but I'm kind of skipping that. But if you're interested, you can stop me if you're interested in other customers that are using Code Whisperer and kind of how they're doing it. But I wasn't gonna lean good there too long. And I'm gonna actually, now that I'm gonna shut off my video just to save everybody bandwidth. Although I don't know if I can actually do it. Oh, here, yeah. Yeah, I'm just gonna shut off my video just so it's easier on everybody's bandwidth. So uh, the kind of impetus behind AI generated code is obviously that um, interestingly enough, there is actually still a shortage of developers in the world now, and you can kind of see that as uh, the the rates that even out of college coders are getting. The rates are actually really good out there. So programming is still a highly demanded skill. But what you'll see that's surprisingly is that coders spend a tremendous amount of time on what we kind of call undifferentiated code. So that's kind of like the analogy to our undifferentiated heavy lifting in AWS. Just spending time on boilerplate, uh, non-productive, non-business value bringing code. Um, and and these are not only uh, time consuming for a programmer, they're also boring and laborious, and that tends to produce bugs, and it might tend to produce security problems, all kinds of issues with undifferentiated code. And it also makes it so that if you got a lot of boilerplate code, you also have the tendency to um, make that very difficult to share that code in a team environment. So that makes it very hard to um, to transition code over to other people and things like that. I mean, I know this is always a problem for me. When I was a programmer, you get code handed over you from somebody else, or you're fixing a bug from somebody else, and you have to go through that code and and try to figure out what it's doing and all that kind of stuff. So undifferentiated code is sort of what the goal of a lot of this is to get rid of. Um, a lot of companies, if you're working in open source in individually, this isn't a problem, but in a lot of organizations, there's open source restrictions, not only in what libraries you use, but also in attributing open source. So if you like copy a piece of open source off the web and you paste it into your code, you start to run into, depending on how big that chunk of code is, you start running into um, attribution problems and open source problems that now you've pasted open source into your code, and so there's a lot of problems there. Um, the shortage of focus time, this is kind of interesting one. This is where, you know, you have, if you as any kind of technical person, you have kind of this narrow band sometimes of where you're really, really on point and you're in the zone. And so you want to make the most use of those periods. So when you're in the zone, you want to crank stuff out, and you don't want to be fumbling to try to do routine things. You want to be using that time to really accomplish a lot in those times. Sometimes it'll be like an hour or two, or maybe 3 hours for me, but it's usually like an hour where I'll just notice I'm like really in the zone. And in those times, I really want to crank out what I'm trying to deliver very fast. There is a lot of time spent learning technologies and APIs and best practices. And for the most part, most programmers or most technical people in general, we don't tend to memorize every little thing that we do. You look things up, you paste those in, you modify them, and then you move on. You don't tend to memorize things. That's what the kind of like the internet's for. And then last but not least, like I kind of said, application security is always important. AWS, we take security very, very seriously. We always say that security is job zero for us. So everything that we do in AWS is built on a framework of security. So we want to make sure that that's all in the case of programming. We want to make sure that that's still the case. So the idea of modern teams using AI to get more done, you can see that as we have gone as we have kind of progressed in the software development world, it was becoming very, very time consuming for developers to spend the time to explore and learn and hand code everything, because the amount of information and the amount of APIs and the amount of programming knowledge necessary to become a programmer was increasing exponentially. And so you can see here, they're kind of quantifying that here in this graph as like parameters to coding. And you can see that it's just going through the roof exponentially. And that causes programmers to have to specialize or have to, try to, branch into multiple areas. So the idea here today is that we're going to try to use real-time AI coding companions, generative AI, to give the programmer the ability to remain high up on the thought at the thought level, and not have to muck around with all the details of day-to-day coding that we were kind of doing before. So allowing you to bring in generative AI, and then the big brain, you kind of paste all that together, and you integrate that code all together, but you let the generative AI produce all that kind of boilerplate. So that's what CodeWhisperer is. It's this is Amazon's generative AI coding companion. It's available in most languages that you can kind of think of: Go, Rust, PHP, Ruby, C++. There's an SQL version, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it says Scala here, but that actually means Java. There's obviously JavaScript. It shows there. I don't know why they call Scala out specifically, but but it's supported in all the Java kind of dialects. As far as IDEs go, you've got the Amazon IDEs. So you've got the Amazon SageMaker Studio, giving you the ability in Jupyter Notebooks basically to do a coding, code whispering, and code companion in those IDEs. Cloud9, which is kind of shown here too. Cloud9 is the AWS kind of lightweight IDE, and I'm going to show you that as we go forward. Lambda, typically a lot of times in enterprise software, you're developing Lambda code in your IDE, but you can also develop. There's a little IDE, a little baby IDE that's in the AWS console. You can develop Lambda functions. I'll show you that too. but there are other environments as well. But specifically VS Code and IntelliJ, and those are two I'm not going to show today, but and it's probably the two that are most widely used out in the wild, other than Eclipse. So this is the one thing that I'll say, that I am an Eclipse guy. Actually, I'm not a VS Code guy, and I'm not an IntelliJ guy. So unfortunately, they don't have this, and so for Eclipse, so very sad. But I'm heavily politicking inside Amazon to get them to add the capability to Eclipse. So we'll see. Additional capabilities that are kind of cool. One of them is reference tracking. So this gives you the ability to see where code references, when it spits them into your IDE, you know, it's suggesting code in your IDE, it can actually tell you where that code snippet came from. So you can actually use that to kind of filter if you don't want to pull code references off of GitHub or something like that, or you know, any variety of places. You can actually filter those out, or you can make sure that you can attribute that code when it brings it in. You can have a reference and say, you know, attribute where that code came from. So that's very cool, and it's nice in the open source community, obviously, to give attribution to other people on the net. So that's very nice. Security standing, it has the ability to scan your actual code and make suggestions if it spots security vulnerabilities using the kind of the AI kind of methods. It can actually kind of interpret your code. It's almost looking at your code and trying to spot typical security problems. And then bias avoidance. This is where I mean, this is a much kind of different thing, but in case that you have some kind of bias that you're putting in your code, I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure what that is. So the promise of CodeWhisperer is making you go faster, obviously. So they're kind of saying here, based on customer feedback and some kind of trials of CodeWhisperer, that they're seeing as much as 57% faster in your coding, and leading to, because faster tends to be faster tends to lead to success or failure faster. So what that kind of means is it's improving your likelihood to succeed by allowing you to go really, really fast and hit walls faster that you need to hit in order to be successful. So that fast fail concept is then therefore leading to a faster likelihood of success. So the way this actually works is, when you're writing code in any IDE, it's actually sending your comments and the context in your code. It's actually sending that up to the Amazon CodeWhisperer AI engine, and that's doing these things like real-time code suggestions. It's doing the reference tracker for attribution, and it's also scanning your code for security vulnerabilities, and then sending those code suggestions back to your IDE. And like I already said, the benefits are quickly accomplishing programming tasks. That's pretty obvious. Working with unfamiliar APIs, so you don't have to go learn all about the API. You know, everything. You can literally kind of learn the API almost while you're coding. As we're going to see, that's not 100% there quite yet, but I think that's the future. I think this could be used as a teaching platform to teach you how to code and teach you about APIs and teach you how to use specific APIs. Not quite there yet, but we'll see. Then, like I said, improved application security, obviously a benefit if it's going to spot things mistakes that you've made, or security vulnerabilities that you've injected into your code. And then obviously using your favorite tools other than Eclipse. So the code generation, we're going to kind of see it happens pretty fast. You'll see there's a little lag there, and I'll show you what it looks like. But there's a little bit of lag. You got to wait just like a second or so to get it to come back. It can do code generation based on single line or full function block segments. So sometimes you'll see, and this actually depends on the integration in the IDE itself, which one of those it can actually do. But it can inject whole code blocks, or it can do like single line suggestions kind of as you go. And you can match the developer style and patterns, or it can kind of match the developer style and patterns, which is really, really cool. So it can kind of inject the code in the way that you would like it to be injected, which is super cool, like using your variable naming convention and even like brace style and things like that. That's very cool. The reference tracking, like you can see here, in the little example here, they've injected they've created a function to get a URL from a database, and you can see in the little log window, you can see right there at the bottom, provided with reference under MIT from repository blah, and so it gives you the attribution. So that's also handy. Like I said, if you're in an environment where open source is dicey, or they want to make sure that all open source is from specific areas. Security scanning. This is what I was talking about before. You can show that it'll come up with, as it's looking at your code, it can come up with suggestions or warnings based on other kind of recommendations, as it's kind of comparing your code against the other code that can recognize these kind of security vulnerabilities. And you can see here that is actually, I think this security scanning thing, now it's showing this actually in Cloud 9 here. That's what this little screen is here, I think. But they're talking about that it supports it in VS Code and in IntelliJ. So enterprise controls, there is a private license. So I didn't talk about pricing, but CodeWhisperer is free for use as an individual developer, but if you want to have an enterprise license, then it's you can buy an enterprise license for your company, and that will give you the added benefit of enabling single sign-on through AWS's Identity Center, and that allows you also inside your AWS accounts to set up organizational policies, automatic filtering, like I said, of all this open source stuff. If there are sensitivities about open source, you can filter how all that works. Now, I believe, and I need to find this out more specifically, but I believe that you can still use the individual version of this, so tied to an individual account. I think you can still use this for generating code at work. I need to find that out more specifically. That's what I'm not entirely sure, but if anybody's interested, I will find out that. I still haven't gotten a perfect answer since this is such a new service, but I think that's true. But anyway, the enterprise license gives you access to, kind of like what I said, the single sign-on and the organizational policies and kind of organizational control, and it also allows you to control the permissions and things like that through IAM. So that's handy. The use cases should be fairly obvious, since I already sort of went through these. This is kind of like saying the same thing. Obviously, accelerating your development tasks, adopting new technology that you're not used to, and complex APIs and things like that. It allows you, really specifically, and the thing I use it for the most is allowing you to easily code against AWS services. So when you're building new AWS services, the AWS completion, even though it's not limited to that, it'll give you code completions or code suggestions for anything. But I use it a lot for the AWS services, so that I can just kind of code something up, and that's actually what I'm going to show you in the example. And then, like we said, obviously improved security model. these are kind of jumping off points for if you want to get started. There's a deep dive workshop here that I'm going to paste these URLs into the chat just so you can see what just so you don't have to do the QR codes here. But and then there's a whole video out there about how to drive an event-driven serverless application using CodeWhisperer. So the guy in the video, he just goes through and he uses CodeWhisperer to kind of generate this pretty big app. It's pretty amazing, and he does it in like less than an hour. So he builds out a whole app using CodeWhisperer in front of you. It's actually pretty impressive. It's pretty cool. Whereas if you had tried to build that app out and you didn't know kind of what those APIs were and things like that, it would take you a long time to build that app out. So it's pretty impressive. Like I said, I think I'm going to paste all 3 of these URLs in there so you don't actually have to grab them unless you just like doing QR codes. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you a kind of a demo of this and how this actually works. I'm not going to do it in VS Code and IntelliJ, like I said. In VS Code and IntelliJ, I'm going to give you the starting point for CodeWhisperer, and it'll kind of show you how to set CodeWhisperer up in VS Code and IntelliJ. It shows it how to set it up and everything. But I'm not going to show you that. I just wanted to call out that when you do VS Code and IntelliJ, there's some extra integration you have to do to get it to work. You have to create this account and stuff like that. When you use your the internal AWS tools, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit more integrated in with Cloud9 and Lambda. So those are the 2 that I'm actually going to show you. I'm not going to go too much in detail about setting up Cloud9 just because it's fairly involved. But I'll give you some links to how you can do it. If you're interested in Cloud9, as I'll show you, Cloud9 is super handy for trying out and building applications on the fly that are, because you can crank up a Cloud9 environment really, really fast. And it comes already integrated very nicely into AWS. So you really don't have to do anything. It's just kind of all ready to go. So it's a really, really handy way to get started generating and coding AWS services really, really fast. Okay, with that, I am going to stop here, and I'm going to switch over to my other screen share here. Let's see. I think I'm just going to share my. I think I'm just going to share this. Let's see if that actually works here. And can somebody verify? I'm gonna put on my Karna Jeremy, Justin. Can you verify that you're seeing kind of like my very dark?
That's your console.
Yeah, console. Okay, good. That's what I wanted to do. I was going to first start out and just show you really, really fast how to start up a Cloud9 environment, just because it's so easy. I'm in my console here. I'll go to the root of the console here, and to start up a Cloud9 environment, you can type C9 or Cloud9 or whatever. The first one that comes up is typically the case. I usually hit return just because it's easier. And you can see I've got one Cloud9 environment running. That's what I'm going to show you. But as always in AWS, hitting the orange button a lot of times is what you want to do. So to create a new environment, you go in here and you and you can, say you give it a name, and it'll give you instance types. So these are actually, Cloud9 is actually running in an EC2 instance. That's how it works. You can, if you're doing very, very small projects, you could do it in a T2 micro. This is actually free tier eligible, so it's free. But a lot of times if you're doing like JavaScript or Python, that might work okay. In Java, you'll typically want to start something a little bit bigger just because it uses a lot of RAM. and having extra CPUs kind of helps out. So I usually will do that M5 large. That usually works out pretty well. And everything else is pretty much the same. So I'm not going to do this because I've already got one running. I just want to show you what it looked like when you create one. It takes a couple minutes to start the whole thing up, but it's pretty fast. It creates the security roles for you, so you don't have to do that. If you you can, of course, control these and use whatever security roles you want to that are applied to the Cloud9 environment. Like I said, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to switch over. I will show you. I'm going to switch over to the one I've already got here, which is this one. And I've already got it open here, so I'm just going to do that. So the first thing I wanted to show you was how you kind of turn on. This is this kind of an existing Cloud9 environment, and I'm not going to get too far into the weeds here about how I got it all set up. It does take a while to set up a Java environment. And that's the first thing I'm going to show you here is I'm going to, this is the, I'm going to paste into the chat here. This first link I'm going to paste in here is this guy. This is actually setting up the Cloud9 environment. And then and then for Java, for those who are Java people, I'm going to paste in 2 links. These are all really off the same, these are all just links right off the same page for setting up Java inside Cloud9. That's what those are. If you're in those, on those web pages, I'll show you here. You can see here that this is the actual code, or that this is the documentation for CodeWhisperer. You can see it's got the setup for all the different things you'd want to do. So it's got IntelliJ, it's got Visual Studio, it's got the setup for Amazon SageMaker, and it also shows you how to use it just in the Lambda console too. So that's cool. I'm going to actually show you that too. So those are actually the 2 easiest ones. The Cloud9 and the Lambda one are the easiest because they're kind of already set up to sort of do it. So if I drop back in here, like I showed you in CodeWhisperer, over here on the left, there's like these 3 icons. There's a search, there's some folders, which are your, just your view of your project folders here. There is a source code control feature that I haven't enabled for this particular example. And then there's this AWS integration menu here. And this is where you're going to enable CodeWhisperer. But I wanted to point out a couple other things here that are really, really cool. It also has integration. You can set it up to have integration into each of your regions in AWS, and it'll show you aspects of your AWS environment. So like here, it's showing me all my Lambda functions here. I'll show you, it'll show me all my S3 buckets here, which is cool. So it's like kind of in your IDE, it just gives you a browser. It'll show you API gateway, APIs. So that's, super cool. Anyway, down here, down at the bottom, you'll see it says CodeWhisperer right there. And you'll see mine says pause auto suggestions. If I hit that, it'll stop. So right now, CodeWhisperer is not running. And so in yours, if you come into Cloud9, you'll just push that button and it'll start up the Cloud9, the CodeWhisperer suggestions, and that's what we want. So you also have interface into the CDK. This is the this is the programmatic control of infrastructure as code. So you can build infrastructure as code using this CDK. I'm not going to go into that today, but that's super cool too. So now we've got it running. One thing I did want to show really fast is you can also in here, just like in anything else, it's already set up to run a command line in AWS. So that's handy, so I can run AWS command line things. I can say like AWS S3 LS to show my S3 buckets, all kinds of cool stuff. So you're already, without doing very much, you're already kind of set up because it's running in AWS. It's already configured to be hooked up to AWS. So that's super nice. the first thing I'm going to show you is kind of the JavaScript side of this. And I got a bunch of, I was just kind of playing around with this and just pasting things in. So I have a whole bunch of examples here, but I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom of this thing here. This is just a bunch of JavaScript examples. I just wanted to show you some of the examples now of kind of how to of how this works. It has the build. I did want to show you this though. How the different kind of modes or the different types of things that you can actually that you can do in as far as getting it to suggest and do its code whisperer thing. It can do single line code completion. So basically it can just add single lines as you go, and you'll kind of see this as I sort of do it. It can inject full function blocks. And it can do block completion, meaning it can recognize that you're at the end of a block, and it can complete that for you. It can actually generate Java doc and doc strings and things like that for you based on just like a simple comment. It can expand those out line by line recommendations, and it can actually and it can do single line comment completion. So you can be typing a comment and it'll kind of try to interpret what you're saying and sort of complete it. So I'll show you like an example of that. So I'm going to just start a comment here, and I'm going to say print out a list, and you can see it's already kind of like suggesting things here, like things to say, like here it's saying of all tables. That's not what I want, but print out a list of bucket names in S3 is what I'm going to do, like that. And so you can see it's already kind of giving me suggestions here. And if it doesn't, sometimes, by the way, I was going to point out, sometimes you'll sometimes it'll be not sure if you actually want the suggestions or not. So in order to get it to do it, on most of the IDs, you can see this in the documentation, if you hit like Command, I think on Windows it's Command C or Alt C on the Mac, to actually kind of kick it to do its code whisperer thing. It's trying to figure out if you actually want them or not. So sometimes you just have to kick it until, yeah, I really do want the code completion. So here it's already doing code completion, and if I want to accept the thing that it's suggesting, it'll actually you hit kind of enter to accept the things that it's saying. So like I'm going to get it to I'm just going to take its recommendation here. So it's going to say it's recommending code here for me to list the buckets necessary. So I'm just going to accept that. It doesn't do the code formatting perfectly. You'll see sometimes like it messes up on the code formatting, but yeah, so you'll see me kind of correct the formatting just because I'm obsessive about about placement of braces. Now the thing about this code, so it just injected a little thing in here for me to list the buckets in S3. One thing to notice here is it's kind of assuming that I've got a handle to the client S3 service right there. So right there, it's assuming that, and I actually don't have that. So as I've kind of learned to sort of do this, what's kind of cool is I can go back up here and go, okay, get an S3 client like that. And then it'll actually generate that for me too. So I can sort of do that. And so it kind of knows that I need to, go back and generate this. That's giving me an error here because I've already got that above. So, but we'll just live with that error here. Now, the other thing that I've noticed too is it doesn't handle, and by the way, all my criticisms here that I'm going to give of it, these are constantly evolving. I'm sure they're gonna, these are going to get better as we go. Like they're literally getting better as we're speaking right now. This AI is like learning as we speak, so it's getting better. But one of the things that I've noticed is it doesn't handle functions and closures very well. So like here, this code right here to list the buckets, it's not using a closure. So usually what you have to do is I'll go back in here, and this is kind of where you sort of have to still know what you're kind of doing here when you're programming this. It's giving you the templates, but it's not doing them kind of the way I would like it to do it. So so as far as generating the code, I would rather use a closure here instead of pulling back the data as list buckets and iterating through it like that. I would rather use a closure. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to modify this to use a closure, and so I'm going to get rid of all this code here, and I'm going to try to get it to okay, so it is going to do it. See, so I got rid of it, and I kind of gave it a hint that I want to use a closure by opening up that brace there, and it's gonna. And so now it's actually cluing in. It's going, oh, you want to use a closure, so it's going to inject the closure for me. And this is actually really super cool that it can do this, that it can understand what I'm doing. Now, again, like I said, I'm not happy with it. with the indent style here, but anyway, but you kind of see what I'm saying. Yeah, see, it's kind of messing up the indent, but that's okay. So anyway, you get the idea. It's, I'm obsessive about my indent. I know it's a problem. So you'll kind of see that now, because I kind of went back and kind of gave it a recommendation that I wanted a closure now, instead of just invoking it with a promise and waiting for all those results to come back in. Now it actually injected the closure version of this in. So that's actually super cool that it can recognize that. I would like it that it would, and I think in IDEA and Visual Studio, I think what happens in those, and I haven't tested this out because I don't not a big Visual Studio fan, and I don't have IntelliJ. So I think what happens in those, though, I think it has better recommendations and better suggestions. So in those, when it comes up with the suggestions, the code completion suggestions in there, I think it gives you the choice. So it says, do you want to do the promise version, or do you want to do the closure version? So it'll give you multiple choices. Here inside Cloud9, it's only given me one option. And then I have to kind of alter the setup here. But that's okay, though. That's actually not bad. But you, I was going to show you some other things, like you can do, I'll show you another one, like, whoops, I got it. Yeah, so here's just another example. I'm gonna add an item, or I'm gonna say put an item into DynamoDB. How about that? And we'll see what this thing does. I actually don't know what this is going to do. Okay, so it's, again, when it gives me the suggestion, I'm hitting enter, and then it completes that like it did. Now I'm going to hit return like I'm on the next line, and it's going to say, what's it going to say here? Okay, so it's going to give me, okay, so just insert the whole code in here to do it. So now it's giving me the whole DynamoDB code block to insert one item into this table name in DynamoDB, with these attributes. So really super cool, because that's actually pretty fast. And again, same deal. It's assumed that I have a service called a DynamoDB, and I actually think I haven't tested this, but I actually think if you have a service that's already called DynamoDB, like if I had done this the proper way and said get DynamoDB service client or something, I don't know what you say here, it'll actually it'll give me the service client right here. And I think if I had done this the forward way, it would have, and I had changed the name of this, I think it can actually understand and use it. Like if I just said, if I just called this that, Dyn, I think when it injects the code, it'll actually use that service name right there, instead of just putting its own service name in, I think. But you can use this for all the AWS services. You can do things also, like I said, it's not just limited to AWS. You can say read CSV file, like just that, and it'll generate code to do that. Or you can say read a CSV file out of S3 and save the second field. You can say all kinds of crazy stuff here, and it'll actually try to generate this for you. So I'll show you as we go here. So it's gonna kind of piecemeal give me the thing as we go here. Oops, wait a minute. Oops, I just scrolled to the bottom. So you can see it kind of takes it a second to think. It's thinking every time we actually do this. So here's, so it's gonna oh, shoot, I keep making I keep hitting Control V here. Anyway, I don't have to go through this whole thing, but but in this particular case, it's giving me line by line completions, just so it's basically going, is this what you want? But it gave me the bucket name, and now it's gonna give me a now it's gonna give me a closure. Forgetting the object. So anyway, you kind of get the idea. In all cases, what you're going to have to do here is go through this this code and clean it up, obviously in terms of indent, but also then clean it up in terms of and just make sure it's doing exactly what you want. In this particular case, I'm kind of pleased because it actually did give me the closure version of getting an object out of S3. And then you can see right here, it actually gave me the closure version. And then inside that closure version, it's invoking CSV to JSON. I didn't really ask it to do that, but that's okay. Anyway, it didn't do the second field thing. I'm seeing it didn't do that, but anyway, you get the idea. So really powerful because it's really fast at generating this, and it's giving you these great leaps forward, but you still, obviously, like I said, you still got to know how to code. You still got to know how to, tie all this code together. I'll show you really fast what this looks like in Java, if you're interested in the Java version. And in Java, like in JavaScript, the thing I was going to show you here, it's exactly the same as it was above here. See, I've got some toins around that I've already done here, but I was going to show you what it looks like when you can actually tell it that you want you can have it create the whole method for you. So you can say method to list buckets in S3. So now instead of JavaScript here, we're now in and so now it's actually going to generate the whole code for you, meaning the whole function, which is actually really super nice. Oops, I didn't want that. Yeah, so really nice that it's that's generating the whole function for you. And again, you gotta mess with the indent, but that's okay. Anyway, so it can understand that you want to inject a method, and it can understand that you just want to inject the code itself if you're inside of a method that you've already created. So let's see. The last thing I was going to show you now is inside. I'm going to flip over. So this was what I've been showing you now is the Cloud9 environment. I wanted to kind of talk just a little bit about the Cloud9 does support full Java development. I'm a Java guy, so of course that's what I'm going to want. It's got integration with Maven. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, obviously, that Eclipse and IntelliJ have. Those things are just huge powerhouse Java development systems. This is a very lightweight version of it. What I use this thing for is when I'm doing stuff like this, where I'm spinning up ideas I want to play around with, especially with AWS integration. That's how I use Cloud9. And the other beautiful part about it is you can save these Cloud9 environments, shut them down. They'll auto shut down when you're not using them, but they're really handy when you're switching around between computers. So say, for example, you're working on something, you're at home working on something, and you want to be able to move back and forth between the office or back and forth between, some other location, or you want to actually do like pair programming and things like that. Cloud9 has support for active pair programming where two people can be writing code in the same Cloud9 environment. So, so you're not having to kind of switch and move your move your coding environment around if you're like an Eclipse or IntelliJ. That is actually kind of a pain. So anyway, so take a look at Cloud9 and you can try it out. If you obviously need an AWS account, you can try it out for free. If you just start up an AWS account and you use the free tier, you'll be able to do the entire thing for free. The last thing I'm going to show you now, as we approach the end of our time together here, I'm going to show you. I'm going to start a new tab here, just to keep my tabs open here. I'm going to go back to my AWS console here, and I'm going to show what this code completion actually looks like in Lambda. Since, like I said, this has a Lambda version of it. So I'm going to actually just create a Lambda function, and I'm going to use the blueprint. I'm going to do this, create the hello world function. I'll say hello. I'm going to use everything kind of as is. In this particular case, I'm going to actually, you can have it create the role with basic permissions. I'm actually going to choose mine here just to show you that you can actually do that. And I'm going to choose that this Lambda function has S3 read-only access. So this will grant it read-only access. And it gives you like just a hello world example. This is the code it's going to do. So I'm going to just hit create function. It's going to create that. We'll come over here. So now we got ourselves a Lambda function. I don't need any of that code here, so I'm going to get rid of all that. But you can see here, right here in this tools environment, this is like a tiny little IDE just for Lambda functions. This is really good for playing around with and developing ideas in Lambda, especially with the code suggestions from Code Whisperer. This makes it really, really super powerful for just experimentation. Now, as always, I would suggest that when you're actually building enterprise level Lambda functions, I would suggest being a little bit more formal about it than just just developing in the Lambda window. That's probably not the greatest idea, but for playing around with ideas in conjunction with Code Whisperer, especially, this is really, really super powerful. You can build your Lambda function right here. You can test it with test inputs and run it right here and see what the output is going to be, like right in the thing, and then you can deploy it out as a deployed piece of code. So you do the whole thing right from here. Very, very, very powerful. So, but like I started to say, there should be a check mark if you come in here. When you first come in, it won't be checked. I've got mine checked. So you check that, and that will start using Code Whisperer inside the Lambda thing. And now it's really the same exact experience we had before in the Cloud9 environment, same as in IntelliJ and Visual Studio. So you can see here, I'll do that one thing I did. I'll add a comment here that says put an item into DynamoDB. And we'll do that. And what I noticed inside the Lambda IDE, it doesn't auto suggest the things. And maybe I don't have this configured right, but I think that's by design. I think it's not really designed to be like that. So it shows you right here under tools. If you want to suggest a code snippet, it's Command or it's Alt C. I think that's Command C or Option C on Windows, but on the Mac it's Command C. So I'm going to hit Command C, and it'll fetch a suggestion, and then you just kind of you hit Tab or you hit Enter to accept them on both. So I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm just going to keep hitting Alt C. It's going to keep. Here's where it's getting the DynamoDB client. Hit suggest again. This is that's still getting the document DB, Oh, I don't. Yeah, we don't really need the document client. I don't think it's going to use that, but I'm just going to keep. I'm just going to keep letting it suggest things, and I'm going to accept them as so it's creating my. Yeah, again, see the tabbing is not great here. I'll fix all that up in a second. But it's okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to fix that tabbing up so it doesn't drive me crazy. Okay. Oops. And then let's see what else it's got for me here. It's gonna add that. Like I said, I think in IntelliJ and Visual Studio, I think it will inject. You can choose to inject these entire blocks in all at once. And I think as just a limitation of this particular IDE system, it forces you to go line by line on these particular ones. But that's not the end of the world. It's not that big a deal. But okay, so here now you can see it's now injected the code in here for us. I guess it is using that document client. It's injected the code in here for us to see what to insert an item, into a DynamoDB table. So really super cool. You can use this thing has thousands and thousands of suggestions. I have just barely scratched the surface. You can basically ask it anything you want to, and it'll pull open source suggestions from the outside world and try to suggest them into their into your code. Very, very complex things that can do amazing things. Oh, I see somebody's asking about recording. I don't know. Jeremy, I didn't ask
Yeah, we are
you.
recording this
Oh,
session, and we'll
okay.
be
Okay.
making this
Oh,
available in a couple of weeks.
okay.
I've got a
Awesome.
little bit of a backlog, so it's probably going to be later in June.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why.
That's no problem at all. So everybody, that's the end of my presentation. If you've got questions, definitely ask. Like Jeremy said, he will post the video out. And as always, if you've got questions on anything AWS related, I'm your guy. I'm local in Birmingham. I will hopefully this summer I'll try to make it out to some events. I've been kind of lazy this winter, haven't done it, but I will be I'll be available for asking questions, brainstorming. But you can always find me. You can email me. I'm gonna put my email in here just so everybody has it in case. I think it was on the thing, but just in case, there's my email. I'll try to answer your questions. I'll try to find things, or I'll try to get you answers. But I'd love to hear if people have used Code Whisper or and you've got and you got feedback. I'd love to hear it. If you've got success stories, I'd love to hear those. And that's true of anything else on AWS. So I'm here. I'm here. Me and John Bird are kind of like the local essays here in town. So if you've got if you've got ways to use us, feel free to use us. With that, I will call it there. And Jeremy, hand back to you if there's any to close this out.
Great, thanks a lot. Any last call for any questions? Thanks. First of all, Chris, thanks a lot for this walkthrough. This is a
Sure
hot topic for everybody with everything
Yeah.
going on with GPT and AI in general. So to see sort of a real world use case, the way it's applied here is definitely very timely.
Yeah,
So
fun stuff.
Always great to have Chris as I mentioned, as an essay for the Birmingham and I guess Central and North Alabama area, and always a very supportive influence locally and participant with our local community. So I encourage you all to reach out to him and or Karna anytime with your cloud needs. So with that, any questions specific to this session that anybody'd like to bring up now?
Yeah, I have a couple. One is, do you know, one of the ways I use ChatGPT in development often is to kind of interact with it and prompt One of the biggest
prompt
values
mode.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, kind of like an
Yeah.
interactive mode. And one of the biggest values is it kind of provides ideas that I didn't have before, or like, oh, I didn't know you could do that way. You know, it's more, is there any plans
Yeah.
to integrate some sort of like interactive element into Code Whisper?
Yes. The answer is yes. They that prompt thing you're talking about with ChatGPT, that's really how they want this to kind of be with Code Whisper. But the way they want to do it is a little bit interesting. Instead of you chatting with the thing to show, to kind of tell what you want, they want it to kind of learn from you, but use the context from your code. So imagine you're coding along, and what ideally it should be doing is it should be looking at all of your code and going, okay, here's what he's trying to do, right? Instead of you having to prompt it like you do in ChatGPT. You always, in ChatGPT, you're always like correcting. You're like, no, be more concise. No, do this, right? You're kind of like, you're correcting it via, the chats. Here, what you kind of wanted to do is do two things. You want to look at all your code and then just guess what it is based on that context, what you want to do. But then when you do correct it, so, if you go back over and you edit back over the code, ideally what it should be doing is sitting there going, okay, it's taking what you just did and learning from what you did. But Corey, yeah, the answer to what you're, the general answer is yes. They want it to be kind of like that chat back and forth style. And they're getting more and more capabilities in there, basically using the context of your code. So ideally, yes. We're not quite there right now. As you can see, this is really the beginning of what's going to happen. I think it's going to get cooler and cooler over time. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Oh, sure. Anybody else? Corey, if you try this out, I'd love to hear your. I'd love to hear your.
So that leads to
impressions.
my next question. I'm typically developing C# in JetBrains Writer, and for some reason I haven't been able to get it to work in Writer. It works in VS Code fine for me. I was going to ask the group or anyone on the call if they've happened to be using JetBrains Writer. I haven't tried it in other JetBrains IDEs, IntelliJ or any. But has anyone had success in getting it to work? Probably more likely nobody's using JetBrains Writer in the group.
Corey, I'll ask around inside AWS. Most AWS people are IntelliJ users. I'm one of the Eclipse holdouts, but I'll ask around here and see if anybody's used it. And if it's not working right now, I would say that over time you'll get better and better support out there, is my guess.
Yeah,
and like
I
you
haven't
said,
spent a lot of time troubleshooting it because it's, I've expected that there would be just a fix show up one day.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would expect that too, especially from IntelliJ, because they're pretty good about making sure that stuff works pretty flawlessly. So yeah. But yeah, I apologize in advance that it's not working. I think that integration, I don't know who builds that integration, if it's AWS that built that plugin or if it's IntelliJ. I don't know who actually did it, but
I suspect it's AWS. It's part of the AWS tools singular extension. So I would imagine it is AWS.
I got you. Okay, that makes sense then. Yeah.